Montana Territory. 1873. The sound of splintering wood echoed across the barren prairie as Evangeline Murphy's wagon wheel cracked clean in half, sending her tumbling onto the dusty ground. 6 months pregnant and alone on the endless frontier, she watched her only means of escape roll away in pieces. But what happened next would become legend in these parts, a tale of a woman who refused to surrender, even when the wilderness itself seemed determined to break her. Little did she know, a mysterious cowboy watching from the ridge would soon change everything. The sun hung mercilessly overhead like a copper coin pressed against the vast Montana sky. Evangeline wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her calloused hand, her other arm cradling her swollen belly. The wagon had been groaning and creaking for miles, but she had pushed it forward, knowing that stopping meant certain death in this godforsaken wilderness. "Come on, Buttercup," she whispered to her mare, the only companion she had left in this world. "Just a few more miles to Copper Creek. We can make it." But the fates had other plans. The wheel hit a hidden rock with a sickening crack. Wood splintered, metal bent, and Evangeline found herself thrown from the driver's seat onto the hard-packed earth. Dust filled her lungs as she struggled to breathe, her hands instinctively protecting her unborn child. When the dust settled, the sight before her was enough to break a lesser woman's spirit. Her wagon loaded with everything she owned in this world sat crooked and useless. The front wheel had shattered completely, its spokes scattered like broken bones across the prairie. Evangeline struggled to her feet, brushing dirt from her worn calico dress. At 24, she had already endured more hardship than most folks saw in a lifetime. Her husband Thomas had died of fever 3 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. The baby wasn't due until winter. But out here, winter might as well be tomorrow. "Well, Buttercup," she said to the mare, who stood patiently despite the chaos, "looks like we're walking." But even as the words left her lips, Evangeline knew walking wasn't an option. Not in her condition. Not across 50 miles of empty prairie. Not with wolves and worse things hunting in these parts. She had two choices: fix the wagon or die trying. She walked around the broken wheel, studying it like a doctor examining a patient. Thomas had been the handy one, but she'd watched him work countless times. Wood could be mended, metal could be bent back into shape. It would take time, and it would take everything she had, but she'd be damned if she'd give up now. "First things first," she muttered, rolling up her sleeves. "Before we begin, we'd love for you to watch the story closely and, by the end, rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us understand the kind of stories you enjoy, and it guides us in creating even better content for you." Evangeline had learned long ago that sitting around feeling sorry for yourself was a luxury she couldn't afford. While other women her age were tending parlors and discussing the latest fashions from back east, she had been helping Thomas build their homestead from nothing but hope and determination. She unhitched Buttercup and led her to a patch of scrub grass, then began taking inventory of what she had to work with. Her husband's tool box was still secured in the wagon bed: a hammer, some nails, a saw, and various other implements that had built their small cabin before the fever took him. The broken wheel lay in pieces around her, but Evangeline's trained. I could see possibility in the wreckage. 3 of the spokes were still intact. 2 others were cracked but salvageable. She would need to find wood for the missing pieces. But out here on the prairie, trees were as scarce as honest politicians. That's when she remembered the spare planks Thomas had insisted on bringing. "Never know when you might need to patch something," he had said in his practical way. She'd thought it was just extra weight then, but now those boards might be the difference between life and death. Working in the blazing sun, Evangeline began the painstaking process of rebuilding her lifeline. She used Thomas's knife to shave down the spare planks into spoke-sized pieces, her hands blistering despite the calluses she'd already earned. Each piece had to be measured twice and cut once. There was no room for waste. The baby kicked strongly as she worked, as if sensing the urgency of their situation. "I know, little one," she whispered, pausing to rest her aching back. "Mama's doing her best." Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Evangeline had managed to fashion 3 replacement spokes. But the real challenge lay ahead, putting the wheel back together without proper tools or experience. She had watched Thomas perform similar repairs, but watching and doing were 2 different animals entirely. The hub would need to be carefully fitted, the iron rim would need to be bent back into shape, and everything would need to hold together long enough to reach civilization. As darkness approached, Evangeline made the decision to work through the night. Wolves were active after dark, but they were a known danger. The greater threat was time itself. Every hour that passed was another hour closer to winter, another hour closer to the point where even a repaired wagon wouldn't be enough. To save them, she built a small fire using dried buffalo chips and scrub wood, creating a circle of light in the vast darkness. The flames danced across her determined face as she continued her work, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the steady rhythm of her hammer against metal. What Evangeline didn't know was that she wasn't alone in the wilderness. High on a ridge overlooking the prairie, a figure sat motionless on horseback, watching her struggle with professional interest. Jeremiah Blackwood had been riding the high country for 3 days, checking on his scattered herds, when he'd spotted the dust cloud from the wagon accident. As one of the largest cattle barons in the territory, he'd seen plenty of folks meet their end on these unforgiving plains. Most times, he'd offer assistance, but something about this particular scene made him pause. Through his field glasses, he could see it was a woman, and she was clearly with child. Common sense said he should ride down immediately and offer help, but something in the way she moved, the determined set of her shoulders, the way she'd immediately begun working instead of weeping, made him curious enough to wait and watch. Jeremiah had built his fortune by reading people, and what he saw in this woman was rarer than gold in these parts, true grit. She wasn't waiting for rescue, she was creating her own salvation. He'd heard stories, of course. Folks in town talked about the Murphy woman whose husband had died of fever, leaving her with nothing but debts and a baby on the way. Most had assumed she'd pack up and head back east to family, the way most women did when the frontier proved too harsh. But here she was, alone on the prairie, rebuilding a broken wagon with nothing but determination and whatever tools she could find. Jeremiah found himself impressed despite his usual cynicism about the staying power of settlers. As the hours passed and the woman continued working by firelight, Jeremiah made his own camp on the ridge. He could have ridden down at any time, could have solved her problems with a word and a helping hand. But something told him that wouldn't be what she wanted, not yet. This woman was proving something to herself and to the world. The least he could do was let her try. The sun rose on a transformed scene. What had been a pile of broken wood and twisted metal the day before was now recognizable as a wagon wheel, battered and scarred, but whole. Evangeline sat beside her handiwork, exhausted but triumphant, her hands torn and bloody from the night's work. She had done it, against all odds, with nothing but basic tools and sheer determination. She had rebuilt what the prairie had tried to break. The wheel wasn't pretty, the replacement spokes were rough-hewn. The iron rim showed signs of her amateur metalworking, but it would hold. It had to. Buttercup nickered softly as Evangeline struggled to her feet, her pregnant body protesting every movement. The baby had been active throughout the night, seeming to sense its mother's distress. But now it lay quiet, as if it too was exhausted from the ordeal. The hardest part was still ahead. Getting the heavy wheel back onto the wagon would require strength she wasn't sure she possessed, but she'd come too far to quit now. Using a combination of leverage and determination, she managed to prop the wagon high enough to slide the repaired wheel into place. The axle accepted the wheel with a satisfying thunk, and Evangeline allowed herself a moment of pride. She had done what many grown men couldn't have managed: rebuilt a wagon wheel from scratch in the middle of nowhere with nothing but her bare hands and iron will. But her celebration was short-lived. The sound of approaching hoof beats made her grab for the rifle she kept in the wagon. Out here, riders could mean help or trouble, and she'd learned to assume the worst until proven otherwise. The rider who emerged from the morning mist was not what Evangeline had expected. He sat tall in the saddle atop a magnificent black stallion, his bearing speaking of wealth and authority. His clothes were well-made but practical attire. of a successful rancher rather than a drifting cowboy. Most striking were his eyes, steel gray and sharp as winter, missing nothing as they took in the scene before him. He was perhaps 35, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life under the open sky. But there was an intelligence there that spoke of education and refinement. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deep and cultured, with just a hint of southern gentility. "I'm Jeremiah Blackwood. Couldn't help but notice you might be in need of assistance." Evangeline kept the rifle ready, but not aimed. "I'm managing just fine, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you kindly for the offer." Jeremiah's eyes took in the rebuilt wheel, the scattered tools, the evidence of a night's hard labor. When he looked back at Evangeline, there was something new in his expression, something that might have been respect. "I can see that, ma'am. Most impressive work, if I may say so. That will look like it was built by someone who knew what they were doing." "My husband was handy with tools," Evangeline said. Still cautious, "I picked up a few things watching him work. Your husband's a fortunate man to have such a capable wife." The shadow that crossed Evangeline's face told Jeremiah everything he needed to know. She corrected quietly. "Thomas died 3 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Might I ask your name?" "Evangeline Murphy, and I'm obliged for your condolences, but I really should be getting on my way. Copper Creek's still a good distance, and I'd like to make it before dark." Jeremiah nodded, but made no move to leave. "Forgive my presumption, Mrs. Murphy, but Copper Creek's a hard 40 miles from here. That wheel of yours, fine work that it is, might not make the journey on these rough trails." Evangeline's jaw tightened. "It'll hold. I'm sure it will. But if it doesn't, you'll be in worse shape than you were yesterday. No offense intended. But a woman in your condition shouldn't be taking such risks." "Mr. Blackwood," Evangeline said, her voice taking on a steel edge, "I appreciate your concern, but I've been taking care of myself and my own for some time now. This baby and I will reach Copper Creek just fine." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Jeremiah simply nodded. "I'm sure you will, ma'am. But if you'll permit me, I'd like to ride along with you just to make sure you reach town safely. These trails can be dangerous for a lone traveler." Evangeline studied him carefully. She'd met all kinds of men on the frontier, good ones and bad ones, and plenty who fell somewhere in between. Jeremiah Blackwood seemed to be cut from different cloth than most. His offer felt genuine, not like the kind of help that came with strings attached. "I suppose I can't stop you from riding the same trail," she said finally, "but I won't be beholden to you for it. Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am." As they set out across the prairie, Evangeline couldn't help but notice how Jeremiah positioned himself close, enough to help if needed, far enough away to give her independence. It was a delicate balance that spoke of a man who understood pride and respected it. The repaired wheel held steady as they traveled, though Evangeline could feel every bump and rut in the rough trail. Jeremiah's stallion moved with easy grace beside the wagon, and she found herself stealing glances at both horse and rider. "That's a fine animal," she commented during one of their brief stops to rest Buttercup. "Thunder's been with me 8 years now," Jeremiah said, patting the stallion's neck affectionately. "Pulled me out of more than one tight spot. A good horse is worth his weight in gold out here." Thomas always said the same thing. He had a real way with animals, horses, cattle, even wild things seemed to trust him. Evangeline's voice carried a wistfulness that made Jeremiah glance over at her. "What brought you and your husband to Montana territory?" "Same thing that brings most folks the chance for something better." Thomas heard there was good land for homesteading, soil that would grow crops and grass for cattle. "We had nothing back in Ohio except debts and his father's disappointment, so we figured we had nothing to lose." "And did you find it? The something better?" Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly. "For a while, we did. Thomas built us a good cabin, cleared 20 acres, even started a small herd. We were going to have everything we dreamed of." She paused. "Then the fever came through, and just like that, all our dreams were gone." "I'm sorry," Jeremiah said, and meant it. He'd seen too many good families broken by the harsh realities of frontier life. The debts came due after Thomas died. I sold what I could, but it wasn't enough. Lost the cabin, the land, most of the cattle. This wagon and Buttercup are about all I have left in the world, besides what's growing inside me. Where will you go? In Copper Creek, I mean. There's a woman there, Minerva Hayes. She runs a boarding house and takes in women who need work. I can sew, cook, clean, whatever needs doing. It's not much, but it's honest work, and it'll keep me and the baby fed. Jeremiah nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was thinking hard about something. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the creak of the wagon wheels and the soft thud of hoof beats on the dusty trail dot as the sun reached its zenith. They stopped again to rest in whatever shade they could find beside a small creek. Evangeline carefully climbed down from the wagon, her movements slow and deliberate. The baby was active today, and she could feel the strain of the journey in every part of her body. Mrs. Murphy, Jeremiah said as she knelt by the creek to splash cool water on her face, "Might I ask you something?" "I suppose. What you did back there rebuilding that wheel, that took considerable skill and determination. Most men wouldn't have attempted such a thing, let alone succeeded." Evangeline looked up at him, water dripping from her chin. "Wasn't any choice in the matter. Sometimes you do what you have to do, or you die trying. That's just it. Though you didn't have to do it. You could have waited for help or accepted defeat, but you chose to fight. What's your point, Mr. Blackwood?" Jeremiah was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I've been watching people all my life. It's how I've survived and prospered out here. Most folks, when they hit a wall, they either break or they find someone else to break it down for them. But you rebuild the wall into a door and walk right through it. Pretty words, Mr. Blackwood. But I'm still a pregnant widow with nothing but a patched-up wagon and a tired horse. For now, perhaps, but I have a feeling that won't be the case for long." As the afternoon wore on, Evangeline found herself growing curious about her mysterious companion. Jeremiah Blackwood clearly wasn't just another drifting cowboy. His clothes, his horse, his manner of speaking all suggested wealth and position. But he rode alone, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of loneliness. "Might I ask what business brings you to this part of the territory?" she ventured during another rest stop. "Cattle," he said simply. "I run a ranch about 20 miles north of Copper Creek. The Broken Bee, perhaps you've heard of it." Evangeline had indeed heard of it. The Broken Bee was one of the largest spreads in the territory, employing dozens of cowboys and running thousands of head of cattle. Thomas had spoken of it with a mixture of admiration and envy. "You're that Blackwood," she said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Thomas always said you ran the finest operation in Montana Territory. Your husband was a generous man. I remember him came by once looking for work during the spring roundup. I would have hired him, but he said he had his own land to tend. You remember Thomas?" "I remember most folks who show up at my door. Your husband had good hands and an honest face." I was sorry to hear he'd passed. They rode in silence for a while after that, but Evangeline's mind was churning. Jeremiah Blackwood was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, yet he'd spent the better part of 2 days making sure a pregnant widow reached town safely. It didn't make sense unless there was more to the story than he was telling. "Mr. Blackwood," she said finally, "I have to ask, why are you really here? A man like you doesn't just happen to be riding the same trail as a woman in my circumstances." Jeremiah smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, he looked almost boyish. "You're a perceptive woman, Mrs. Murphy. Truth is, I saw your accident yesterday from up on the ridge. I was planning to ride down and offer help, but then I saw you start working on that wheel. You watched me all night." "I did, and I have to say, it was one of the most impressive displays of determination I've ever witnessed. Most folks would have given up after the first hour." Evangeline felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You should have offered to help instead of sitting up there like some kind of vulture, perhaps. But if I had, you never would have discovered what you're truly capable of, and I never would have seen the kind of woman you really are." "And what kind of woman is that, Mr. Blackwood?" "The kind that doesn't come along very often. The kind that builds instead of tears down, that fights instead of surrenders. The kind that this territory needs if it's ever going to be more than just a collection of rough Towns and failed dreams. As Copper Creek came into view in the distance, Evangeline felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that she'd made it safely. Sadness that her journey with Jeremiah Blackwood was coming to an end, despite his mysterious behavior. She'd found his company surprisingly comforting. "There she is," Jeremiah said, pointing toward the cluster of buildings that marked the town. Copper Creek in all her glory. It wasn't much to look at, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few side streets branching off into residential areas, the inevitable church steeple pointing toward heaven. But to Evangeline, it represented safety and a chance to start over. "I'm obliged for your company, Mr. Blackwood," she said as they approached the town limits. "I probably would have made it on my own, but it was nice not to have to try, Mrs. Murphy," Jeremiah said, and something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "Before we reach town, I wonder if I might have a word with you." "Of course." He pulled his horse up beside the wagon, close enough that they could speak quietly. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier about your situation, your plans for the future. What about them? Working for Minerva Hayes is honest work, but it's not much of a life for a woman of your capabilities. You'd be scraping by, working yourself to the bone just to put food on the table. It's what I have. Mr. Blackwood, not all of us can own vast cattle ranches, no, but some of us can share what we have with those who deserve better." Evangeline pulled Buttercup to a stop. What are you saying?" Jeremiah took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something difficult. "I'm saying that I'd like to offer you marriage, Mrs. Murphy, a real marriage, with all the respect and security that comes with it." For a moment, Evangeline could only stare at him. "Are you out of your mind? I know it sounds sudden. Mr. Blackwood, I've known you for exactly 1 day, I know. But sometimes a day is enough to see what kind of person someone really is. And what I've seen tells me you're exactly the kind of woman I've been looking for. You don't know anything about me. I know you're brave enough to face the wilderness alone. I know you're skilled enough to rebuild a broken wagon wheel with nothing but basic tools. I know you're determined enough to keep fighting when most people would give up. And I know you're carrying a child who deserves better than a life of poverty and uncertainty." Evangeline felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "That's not enough to build a marriage on, Mr. Blackwood, isn't it? How many marriages start with less? How many couples marry for convenience, or family pressure, or simple loneliness? At least we'd be starting with mutual respect. Respect doesn't mean love, no, but it's a foundation that love can be built on, if both parties are willing. I'm not asking you to love me, Mrs. Murphy. I'm asking you to give us both a chance at something better than what we have now." Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing. The practical part of her recognized the wisdom in his offer. Marriage to Jeremiah Blackwood would solve all her immediate problems and give her child a secure future. But another part of her, the part that had loved Thomas completely, rebelled against the idea of marrying for anything less than love. "Why," she asked finally, "you could have any woman in the territory. Why would you want to saddle yourself with a pregnant widow who comes with nothing but debts and troubles?" "Because," Jeremiah said quietly, "I've been looking for a true partner all my life, someone who can stand beside me as an equal, not behind me as a decoration, someone who understands what it means to work for what you have, to fight for what you believe in. I've seen a lot of women, Mrs. Murphy, but I've never seen one rebuild a wagon wheel by firelight because giving up wasn't an option, and the baby, Thomas's child, would be my child in every way that matters. I give you my word on that." Evangeline looked toward Copper Creek, then back at Jeremiah's earnest face. "This is madness, perhaps, but sometimes the best things in life are a little mad. What do you say, Mrs. Murphy? Will you give us a chance?" The weight of the decision pressed down on Evangeline like a physical thing. Here was a man offering her everything she'd lost: security, respectability, a future for her child. But marriage was sacred, and she'd already given her heart to one man. Could she really pledge herself to another, especially someone she'd known for such a short time? "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course, but might I suggest we continue this conversation somewhere more private?" The middle of the trail isn't exactly the place for such discussions. Evangeline nodded and urged Buttercup forward. As they entered Copper Creek, she was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. A pregnant woman traveling with a well-dressed stranger was bound to cause talk, and in a small town, talk could be dangerous. Jeremiah seemed to understand her discomfort. "The hotel has a restaurant," he said quietly. "We could continue our conversation there. If you'd like, I should find Mrs. Hayes first. Let her know I've arrived, of course." "Would you like me to wait?" Evangeline considered. Part of her wanted to say goodbye to Jeremiah Blackwood and never see him again. His offer was too tempting, too easy. But another part of her knew she couldn't make such an important decision without talking it through properly. "Yes," she said. "Wait for me." Minerva Hayes turned out to be a thin, practical woman in her 50s who ran her boarding house with military precision. She looked Evangeline up and down with sharp eyes, taking in the travel-stained dress, the obvious pregnancy, the exhaustion that clung to her like dust. "So you're the Murphy woman," Minerva said without preamble. "Heard about your husband's passing. Sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mum. I'm hoping you might have work for me, cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing." "Might. You're further along than I expected. When's the baby due?" "Late December, early January." Minerva nodded. "That gives us a few months to get some use out of you before you're laid up. I can offer you room and board plus $2 a week. You'll work 6 days, rest on Sunday, and help with whatever needs doing." It wasn't much, but it was survival. Evangeline was about to accept when Minerva continued. "Course, that's assuming you're planning to stay unmarried. Saw you ride in with Jeremiah Blackwood. That's bound to cause talk. If you're thinking of taking up with him, you might want to make it official quick like. I don't run that kind of establishment." The words hit Evangeline like a slap. In her worry about the practical aspects of Jeremiah's proposal, she'd forgotten about the moral implications. A pregnant widow seen in the company of an unmarried man would be subject to exactly the kind of gossip that could destroy what little reputation she had left. "Mr. Blackwood was kind enough to escort me safely to town," she said carefully. "Nothing more than that." Minerva's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, either way, the job's yours if you want it. You can start Monday morning." "Thank you, Mum. I'm grateful for the opportunity." But as Evangeline walked back toward the hotel, she realized her options had just become much clearer and much more limited. Jeremiah was waiting in the hotel restaurant, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He looked up as Evangeline approached, and she saw something hopeful in his expression. "How did it go with Mrs. Hayes?" "She offered me the job. $2 a week plus room and board." "That's not very much. It's enough." Evangeline sat down across from him, suddenly feeling every mile of their journey. "But there's something else. She made it clear that being seen with you could damage my reputation. Apparently, an unmarried pregnant woman keeping company with a bachelor is the kind of thing that causes talk." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "I should have thought of that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make your situation more difficult." "You didn't know." Evangeline looked down at her hands, still scratched and stained from rebuilding the wagon wheel. "But it does make your proposal more practical." "I don't want you to marry me just because it's practical, Evangeline. That's not fair to either of us." The use of her first name sent a small thrill through her, though she tried to ignore it. "What would be fair, Mr. Blackwood?" "Jeremiah. And fair would be if you married me because you believe we could build something good together, because you think there's a chance for real partnership between us." Evangeline studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden motive. All she saw was honest concern and something that might have been hope. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally. "The Broken Bee. It's about 5,000 acres of good grazing land, plus another 1,000 in timber. I run about 2,000 head of cattle, with a crew of 15 cowboys year-round. More during roundup season. The house is—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "It's large, but it's not a home. Not really." "What do you mean?" "I built it for function, not comfort. It's a place to sleep and conduct business, but it's never been a place where a family could flourish. I always thought that would come later, when I found the right woman to share it with." And you think I'm that woman. I think you could be, if you wanted to be. But more than that, I think you could help me make the Broken Bee into something more than just a successful ranch. You could help me make it into a legacy." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. A legacy was what Evangeline and Thomas had dreamed of building together. Something that would outlast them. Something that would give meaning to their struggles. The fever had stolen that dream. But perhaps it didn't have to stay stolen. "I loved my husband," Evangeline said quietly. "I know. And I respect that. I'm not asking you to forget him or to love me the way you loved him. I'm asking you to give us a chance to build something different, but equally meaningful. And if we can't, if we try and fail, then we'll have tried with honor and respect, and that's more than most couples can say. But I don't think we'll fail, Evangeline. I think we're both too stubborn for that." Despite everything, Evangeline found herself smiling. Stubborn might be the right word. Is that a yes? Evangeline looked out the window toward the street where her wagon sat, Buttercup patiently waiting for whatever came next. Everything she owned in the world was in that wagon, and it wasn't much. But she'd built that wagon wheel with her bare hands when it seemed impossible, and maybe, just maybe, she could build a life the same way. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jeremiah Blackwood." They were married 3 days later in the small church on the edge of town, with Minerva Hayes and the hotel keeper serving as witnesses. Evangeline wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she'd made herself back when she and Thomas were planning their future. It was a little tight now with the baby, but it was clean and pressed, and it would have to do. Jeremiah wore a black suit that looked like it had been tailored for him, and Evangeline realized once again just how different their circumstances were. But when he took her hands during the ceremony, his grip was steady and warm, and when he spoke his vows, she heard sincerity in every word. "I, Jeremiah Blackwood, take you, Evangeline Murphy, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and stand beside you in whatever challenges we face. I promise to be a father to your child and a true partner in building our life together." When it was her turn, Evangeline found her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. "I, Evangeline Murphy, take you, Jeremiah Blackwood, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you as your partner, to work with you in building something lasting, and to bring honor to the name you're giving me." The ring Jeremiah placed on her finger was simple gold, but it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Later, she would learn that he'd had it sized by the town jeweler based on his observation of her hands. But at the moment, it seemed like a sign that perhaps they were making the right choice. After the ceremony, they shared a quiet meal at the hotel restaurant. Other diners stared curiously, but Jeremiah seemed oblivious to the attention, focusing entirely on Evangeline. "Are you ready to see your new home?" he asked as they finished their meal. "As ready as I can be, I suppose." They loaded Evangeline's few possessions into Jeremiah's wagon. He'd brought a proper buckboard for the journey to the ranch, leaving the repaired freight wagon with the livery stable owner who'd admired her handiwork. Buttercup was tied behind, and Evangeline found herself grateful that she wouldn't have to leave her faithful mare behind. As they drove out of Copper Creek, Evangeline felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. She was Mrs. Jeremiah Blackwood now, wife to one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. But she was also still herself a woman who'd rebuilt a broken wagon wheel with her bare hands, because giving up wasn't in her nature. "Nervous?" Jeremiah asked, glancing over at her. "A little. It's a big change. It is, for both of us. But I have a feeling we'll figure it out as we go." The Broken Bee Ranch was everything Jeremiah had described, and more. As they crested the final hill, Evangeline gasped at the sight spread before them. Rolling pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with cattle and crossed by clean running streams. The ranch house itself sat on a small rise, a sprawling structure of timber and stone that spoke of both prosperity and permanence. "It's beautiful," Evangeline breathed, and meant it. "It's home," Jeremiah said simply. "Our home now." As they approached the house, Cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse and barn to get a look at their boss's new wife. Evangeline was acutely aware of their curious stares, but she kept her chin up and her back straight. She'd faced down the wilderness itself. A few curious ranch hands weren't going to intimidate her. "Boys," Jeremiah called out as he helped Evangeline down from the wagon. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Mrs. Blackwood," the foreman, a grizzled man named Pete who looked to be in his 60s, stepped forward and touched his hat. "Ma'am, welcome to the Broken Bee." "Thank you, Pete. I'm pleased to meet you all." The other cowboys murmured their greetings, but Evangeline could see the questions in their eyes. She was clearly pregnant, clearly hadn't been married to their boss for long, and clearly came from much humbler circumstances than they might have expected for the wife of Jeremiah Blackwood. "Mrs. Blackwood will be taking over management of the household," Jeremiah announced. "I trust you'll all give her the same respect you've always shown me." "Yes, sir," Pete said. "Speaking for the group, anything the missus needs, she just has to ask." As they walked toward the house, Evangeline noticed the deference the cowboys showed Jeremiah. It wasn't just respect, it was genuine loyalty, the kind that had to be earned through fair treatment and strong leadership. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, but Jeremiah had been right about one thing: it felt more like a business establishment than a home. The furniture was expensive but impersonal, the rooms large but cold. It was a house built by a man who'd never expected to share it with anyone. "The master bedroom is upstairs," Jeremiah said, then paused. "Unless you'd prefer separate rooms. I don't want you to feel pressured. We're married," Evangeline said firmly. "Married couples share a bedroom." Something flickered in Jeremiah's eyes: relief, perhaps, or gratitude. "Thank you. I was hoping you'd feel that way." The first few weeks at the Broken Bee were a period of adjustment for everyone. Evangeline threw herself into the task of making the house feel like a home, rearranging furniture, adding personal touches, and establishing routines that brought warmth to the cold spaces. She also began to understand the scope of Jeremiah's operation. The Broken Bee wasn't just a ranch, it was a small empire with interests in banking, mining, and shipping throughout the territory. Jeremiah was a shrewd businessman who'd built his fortune through careful planning and calculated risks, but he was also a fair employer who paid his workers well and treated them with respect. Evangeline saw this firsthand when she began taking meals to the bunkhouse, something that surprised the cowboys but clearly pleased them. "Never had a boss's wife who cared whether we ate decent food," Pete confided to her one evening as she delivered a pot of stew. "Most ranchers' wives think we're beneath their notice. Everyone who works hard deserves to eat well," Evangeline replied. "Besides, I enjoy cooking for people who appreciate it." The baby was growing active now, and Evangeline often found herself with her hands pressed to her belly, feeling the strong kicks and movements of the child who would soon be born into this new life. Jeremiah had taken to placing his hand beside hers in the evenings, marveling at the life growing within her. "Have you thought about names?" he asked one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Thomas and I talked about it before he died. He wanted to name a boy after his father, William, and if it was a girl, he liked the name Rose. Those are fine names, but you know this child will carry the Blackwood name, don't you? Legally, I'll be the father." Evangeline nodded. "I know, and I'm grateful for that. But I won't let this child forget who Thomas was or what he meant to us. I wouldn't want you to. A child should know their history, all of it. Thomas was a good man, and his memory deserves to be honored." It was conversations like this that made Evangeline realize she'd chosen wisely. Jeremiah could have insisted on erasing Thomas from their lives, but instead he embraced the complexity of their situation with grace and understanding. October brought the first serious test of their marriage. A early blizzard swept down from the north, trapping cattle in the high pastures and threatening to destroy the herd that represented the ranch's primary income. Jeremiah and his men worked around the clock to bring the animals to safety, but it was touch and go. Evangeline found herself managing not just the household but the ranch's communication center, coordinating with neighboring ranchers and keeping track of the rescue efforts. She worked despite her growing belly, despite the worry that gnawed at her every time Jeremiah rode out into the storm. On the third day, when the worst of the blizzard had passed, Jeremiah returned to the house exhausted and half-frozen. Evangeline met him at the door with hot coffee and dry clothes, her relief evident in every movement. "How bad is it?" she asked as he warmed himself by the fire. "We lost about 50 head, mostly young stock. Could have been much worse." "What about the men?" "Everyone accounted for, everyone's safe. Pete took a nasty fall, but he'll recover. The boys are calling you the angel of the broken bee for keeping hot food and coffee coming through. Out the emergency." Evangeline blushed. "I just did what needed doing." "You did more than that. You kept everyone's spirits up when things looked darkest. That's not something that can be taught, it's something that comes from the heart." That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Jeremiah spoke quietly into the darkness. "I want you to know something, Evangeline. These past few weeks, watching you turn this house into a home, seeing how you've connected with the men, watching you handle the crisis, I've never been more certain that I made the right choice in marrying you. Even though I came to you with nothing, you didn't come with nothing. You came with everything that matters: strength, character, the ability to see what needs to be done and do it. That's worth more than any dowry." Evangeline turned to face him in the darkness. "I've been thinking the same thing about you. You could have chosen any woman in the territory, but you chose someone who could stand beside you as a true partner. I'm beginning to think we might actually make this work. More than make it work," Jeremiah said, pulling her closer. "I think we might make it something extraordinary." December brought bitter cold and the approaching birth of Evangeline's child. Dr. Morrison from Copper Creek had agreed to come to the ranch when the time came, but the weather made travel uncertain. Evangeline found herself preparing for the possibility that she might have to deliver the baby, with only the help of Maria Santos, the Mexican woman who served as the ranch's cook and unofficial medical advisor. The labor began on a crystal-clear December morning, 3 days before Christmas. Evangeline had been kneading bread when the first contraction hit, doubling her over with its intensity. Maria took one look at her and immediately began issuing orders. "Sigor Jeremiah, come quickly. The baby, she is coming." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and determination. Jeremiah rode through the snow to fetch Dr. Morrison, but the doctor was delayed by a difficult river crossing. When he finally arrived, Evangeline was already deep in labor. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Blackwood," Dr. Morrison said after examining her. "This baby is in a hurry to meet the world." As the contractions intensified, Evangeline found herself thinking about Thomas, wishing he could be there to see their child born. But when the pain became overwhelming, it was Jeremiah's hand she gripped, Jeremiah's voice that anchored her to the present moment. "You can do this," he whispered. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You can do anything." William Thomas Blackwood entered the world just as the sun was setting on December 22, 1873. He was healthy and strong, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that proclaimed his displeasure at being evicted from his warm haven. When Dr. Morrison placed the baby in Evangeline's arms, she felt a completion she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. This child was the bridge between her past and her future, the living proof that love could survive even the darkest circumstances. "He's beautiful," Jeremiah said, his voice thick with emotion. "Perfect in every way. He's ours." Evangeline said, looking up at her husband. "Yours and mine, and Thomas's, all of ours." Jeremiah leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Welcome to the world, William Blackwood. You're going to love it here." Spring came early to the Broken Bee in 1874, bringing with it a sense of renewal and new beginnings. William had thrived through the winter, growing into a healthy, curious baby who seemed to find wonder in everything around him. Evangeline had recovered quickly from the birth, and she threw herself into the running of the ranch with renewed energy. She had also begun to implement changes that reflected her vision for the future of the Broken Bee. Working with Jeremiah, she established a school for the children of the ranch workers, bringing in a teacher from back east. She also started a garden that would provide fresh vegetables for the entire ranch community. "You're transforming this place," Jeremiah observed one evening as they watched William practice crawling across the parlor floor. "It's becoming the kind of place where families can really flourish." That was always the plan, Evangeline replied. A ranch should be more than just a business, it should be a community. Is that what you and Thomas dreamed of? Building a community? It was. He used to say that the frontier needed people who were willing to build something lasting, something that would outlive them. I think you would have loved seeing what we're creating here. Jeremiah was quiet for a moment, watching their son explore his world with determined curiosity. Do you think he would have approved of us? I mean, Evangeline considered the question seriously. I think Thomas would have wanted me to be happy and secure, and for his son to have a good life. He was a practical man. He would have understood why I made the choices I did. And are you happy? I mean, Evangeline looked around the room at the comfortable furniture they'd chosen together, the family portraits on the mantel, the toys scattered across the floor. Then she looked at Jeremiah, this man who had offered her his name and his life when she had nothing to give in return. I am, she said, surprised by the truth of it. I'm happier than I thought I could be again. Good. Because I have something I want to show you. Jeremiah led her outside to where a crew of carpenters was putting the finishing touches on a new structure near the main house. It was a workshop, complete with all the tools and equipment needed for fine woodworking. What is this? Remember, that wagon wheel you rebuilt with nothing but basic tools and determination? I thought you might like to try your hand at building something from scratch this time. Evangeline walked through the workshop, running her hands over the smooth wood of the workbench, the sharp edges of the new tools. It was a gift that acknowledged not just her practical skills, but her need to create, to build, to make something with her own hands. It's perfect, she said, tears in her eyes. But why? Because I want you to have everything you need to be completely yourself here. The Broken Bee is your home now, but it should also be your canvas. Build whatever you want: furniture, toys for William, anything that makes you happy. 5 years later, Montana Territory, 1878. Evangeline Blackwood stood on the porch of the Broken Bee Ranch House, watching her 5-year-old son William play in the yard with his younger sister Rose, who had arrived 2 years after William. The children were dark-haired and sturdy, with their mother's determination and their father's easy confidence. The ranch had prospered beyond even Jeremiah's expectations. The cattle herd had grown to over 3,000 head, and they'd expanded into horse breeding as well. The school Evangeline had established now served children from 3 neighboring ranches, and the teacher had become a permanent part of the community. But more than the financial success, Evangeline was proud of what they'd built together. The Broken Bee had become exactly what she and Thomas had dreamed of: a place where families could thrive, where children could grow up safe and loved, where the harsh realities of frontier life were softened by the strength of community. Penny, for your thoughts, Jeremiah said, joining her on the porch. Just thinking about how far we've come. 5 years ago, I was a pregnant widow with a broken wagon wheel and no prospects. Now you're the most respected woman in the territory, mother to 2 beautiful children, and partner in one of the most successful ranches in Montana. We're partners in all of it, Evangeline corrected. Everything we've built together. Jeremiah smiled and pulled her close. Do you ever regret it? The choice you made that day in Copper Creek. Evangeline looked out over the thriving community they'd created, then down at her children playing in the yard. William was showing Rose how to stack blocks, his patience and gentleness reminding her so much of Thomas that her heart ached with love and loss and gratitude all at once. Never, she said firmly. I've learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes you have to build your happiness from broken pieces, just like I built that wagon wheel from scraps and determination. And sometimes, Jeremiah added, you have to be brave enough to accept help when it's offered with an honest heart. As the sun set over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Evangeline reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started with nothing but her own strength and determination, had rebuilt her life from broken pieces, and had found not just survival but true happiness. The wagon wheel she'd rebuilt that night on the prairie had carried her to safety, but the life she'd built with Jeremiah had carried her to something far more precious, a future filled with love, security, and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. In the distance, she could see the lights, beginning to twinkle in the windows of the bunkhouse, the schoolhouse, and the other buildings that made up their community. It was a sight that never failed to fill her with pride and satisfaction. She had kept her promise to herself, and to Thomas's memory she had built something lasting, something that would outlive them all. And she had done it not in spite of the hardships that had shaped her, but because of them. The broken wagon wheel had become a symbol of her resilience, displayed now in the workshop, where she continued to create beautiful things with her own hands. Every time she looked at it, she remembered that sometimes the most beautiful and lasting things in life come from taking what seems irreparably broken and finding a way to make it whole again. As Jeremiah had said that first day, she was a woman who built instead of tore down, who fought instead of surrendered. And in building her new life, she had discovered that the heart, like a broken wagon wheel, could be mended with patience, skill, and the unwavering belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The broken bee would continue to prosper, her children would grow up strong and confident, and the community they'd built would endure for generations to come. It was a legacy worthy of both the woman who had loved Thomas Murphy and the woman who had chosen to become Evangeline Blackwood. And it all started with a pregnant woman who refused to give up when her wagon wheel broke on the Montana prairie, who rebuilt it with her bare hands and her iron will, and who caught the attention of a cowboy who recognized strength when he saw it. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with something better, a hard-won happiness built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the unshakable belief that two people working together can accomplish anything they set their minds to. The frontier was still wild and unforgiving, but it was also full of possibility for those brave enough to seize it. And Evangeline Blackwood, née Murphy, had seized it with both hands and never let go. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.